Hello and welcome to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and today we'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 21. So, grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in. This episode is titled Raznus Returns. We start this episode with Tom and Kaz. Tom and Kaz convince Olgiax to let them into the overworld arsenal because Tom heard they were working on a super secret battle gear that could shut down the Marillions. Bodil uses said battle gear to shoot the wall under the arsenal, which reveals a group of Danians tunneling under Kiru City. The Danians attack and capture Tom, Bodil, and Olgiax, but Kaz escapes and goes to get Interest. Raznus argues with Odu Bathax to follow the Queen's orders and stay underground. Meanwhile, Maxor is on a mission in the Riverlands and gets attacked by two Marillions, Erektab and Rathtab, and he uses the Song of Translocation to escape. Then, Raznus and Interest battle, and Raznus reveals that they are looking for a new spot to build a homeland because the Marillions poisoned the water at Mount Pillar. Maxor shows up and stops the fighting because he decides that it's time to team up and face their common enemy, the Marillions. On to analysis. So this episode tonally feels different for me, and I think it marks a tone shift for the rest of the season. This episode is more grounded and serious, and it holds some gravitas to it in the stakes. And sure, there are some comedic moments, like with Bodil and Olgiax and with those characters, but comedy is not the focus, right? This is a direct contrast to the last two episodes where, with When a Codemaster Calls, the premise is Clay is tricking Peyton, and that lends itself to comedy, not only because, there's a fake costume and it's a ploy and it's a prank, but we're following Peyton as the lead and his stream of consciousness, and Peyton holds a lot of the comedy in this series. He's a very comedic character, and so any Peyton episode has a lot of comedy, right? And then this last episode, Earth to Kaz, a Kaz episode, was very low stakes because it was the human world, it wasn't Param, right? When it takes place in the real world and it has this comedic intention behind it because of Kaz's hyperbolic nature, right? Kaz was feeling obsessed about chaotic and took it to an extent that becomes hyperbolic and comedic. And so, in contrast, this episode is serious. We learn about the destruction of both the overworld and the Danian territories, which vastly broadens the Marillions' destruction, and that is something that I like about Chaotic is that they treat these very serious moments with respect and a serious tone because they tell a variety of stories and they each encapsulate a different tone. And so right now we've really shifted into this more serious, widespread devastation of what the Merlians are doing, and that requires a more serious hand. Next, I also like that they use the Kiru City earthquakes as foreshadowing for the Danians tunneling under Kiru City. I think that's smart. They didn't show us the Danians right away, and they didn't show us the Danians with no build up to it. They used the earthquakes as that build up. So I think that's smart. And, the Danians get revealed relatively early on, but they had a couple earthquakes to, really show that the status quo was broken, right? These earthquakes are strange, and therefore, something is amiss. And this episode helps to characterize Olgiax. This is the second time we see his character, I believe, and we get to know him just a little bit, that he's frightened and unsure and easily manipulated, yet incredibly bright, right? He is the smarts behind the mechanical aspect of the gear, and he alters the gear to backfire on Odu Bathax. And, you have to have some kind of smarts and some kind of wit, not only to change the gear in that way, but also to create that plan to help defeat the Danians. So we get this kind of duality of useful, resourceful, and bright, but also needs permission to do so. He has these positive qualities, but he's more inward because he is frightened and unsure. He is smart, but he's unsure about that. But really, this is more of a lore episode for me. We get a lot of information in this episode. First, that Bodil and Olgiax are working on this super secret battle gear, and what the battle gear does is it breaks the molecular bonds of solids. So when he shoots it at the wall, all of those dirt molecules, if you will, got turned into atoms. And so there's no longer dirt there because the dirt molecules aren't dirt, they're atoms. Right? Very scientific of them. But also I suppose that this confirms that like there are molecules in Param, which, take that as you will. Now, this episode also confirms and returns to the already established dynamic between Maxwell and Interest. Interest is one of the few people that knows what Maxwell's location is when he goes on missions, right? He is a close friend. She has the clearance of intel, right? They have this dynamic of, yes, she's a fierce warrior, yes, he's a fierce warrior, but Interest is somebody that he trusts. And we also do get some new faces, right? Interest establishes a team in this episode, if you will, and there's Interest, Atakat, Targubaj, and White Todd. And okay, so Atakat was recently with Tanith Toborn near the Mepedian border, so he had some travels, right? He was with Tanith Toborn, and now he's back in Kiru City. So glad that he traveled safely. But Targubaj and Whitehod are new faces. So we know that these two are warriors that were either on call or Interest had a connection to and had quick access to, right? Interest had to establish a team quickly to go fight the Danians, and these are the people that she picked. She had quick access and the trust and knew that they were warriors, right? So that kind of establishes some kind of dynamic of either they are like with the overworld government or they're friends of interest, but they're in that circle somehow, some way. Now, the big lore is what is up with the Danians, right? Let's talk about that. So we know that Odu Bathax has been tasked to find a place for the Danians to build a new homeland, right, with Raznus and with some guards. So they set off on this expedition, and this seems to be a scouting mission where they are supposed to stay underground and supposed to report back. And they ended up in Kiru City by mistake. So their intention was to go to a destination that was somewhere else, yet they ended up here. And I would call it a happy accident, right? Because this incident builds and gives Maxwell the information he needs to make the executive's decision to build an alliance against the Marillions, right? And so without this incident occurring, that next step of like joining forces won't be attainable. But it did happen, so it's good. And so like kind of a happy accident this happened. But now the real question here is why are the Danians looking to build a new homeland? Right? And we get that answer is because the Marillions poisoned the Mount Pillar reservoir, so Mount Pillar is no longer a viable home. So they need to build a new nest to survive. And what did Maxwell learn about in the Riverlands? That the Marillions polluted the water so that no other aquatic life could be viable. So now this is big news actually, because it demonstrates that the Marillions have been making moves in all four tribes, and that this really is an invasion, right? This is the titular Marillion invasion, and the titular Marillions have been titularly invading. And the Marillions made Mount Pillar inhospitable, and that happened off screen, right? First, a crime, but second, it does go to demonstrate that the ramifications of opening the doors of the deep mines are major and happening all around, right? At a rate that not one group of people could keep up with, right? They can't keep up with everything that's going on because it's so dispersed and like happening quickly, right? The Morelians are overwhelming the Param people from all sides, from all tribes. They're making moves. And now here's the thing. There is an important thing that Maxwell says about the Riverlands when he is examining it and about to fight the Morelians. He says, nothing can live here now except the Morelians. And this is an important piece of information because it establishes that yes, Morelians are aquatic creatures, but they don't need clean water to survive. And it's proven that when we see a variety of Morelian creatures being able to survive in the inhospitable liquid that the Riverlands have become. And this may return to us in the near future, so establishing it now is key. Right? They don't need clean water, they just need some kind of liquid. And now the two Marillions that attack Maxor are two of the Marillions that we saw emerge from the doors in episode 13, which means we've seen now all four of them out and about. Milmaeen was in the underworld, Ihun Kalen was in Mepedian territory, and now we see Erektab and Rathtab in the overworld. We've seen all four of them, they've been out and about. And they already completed their task in the Danian territory and they're moving on to the overworld. Now, I really do want to emphasize that like all of this is happening off screen. And to me, that's kind of amazing, right? Because one, this Marillion invasion is moving both so fast and so slow, right? The doors only opened in episode 13, right? And it's episode 21. It's been 10 episodes, and you think it's been 10 episodes and like kind of nothing has happened, right? We saw a newbie, we saw them like making moves in the underworld, and like that's kind of it. But off screen, they've been making moves in all four territories, and now count it not one, two, there's three different lands that are inhospitable: Riverlands, Lava Pond, Mount Pillar, right? They're making big money moves, and they're just being polite and telling us about it. Now, I'm feeling conflicted there because it is like a show don't tell. Like, I would love to really dive into what happened there, what happened to the Danians, and it feels like there's opportunities for either flashbacks or side quests or more media in the future, like diving into what is happening throughout the Marillion invasion. And I'm thinking almost like if you think about like Marvel Civil War, there was the main Civil War comic that like was the main story, and you can read that and you can get the story, but like each individual character had their own like tie-in comic, like it was a Marvel-wide event, and you could see how that impacted them specifically. I could see something like that happening here with the Marillion invasion. Like you could have one story per tribe. We seen a little bit of the underworld, and now we're seeing a little bit of the overworld. We saw a little bit of the Mepedians, but not a whole lot, right? But there's a whole story there. There's a whole storyline of what happened to the Mepedians. There's a whole storyline what happened to the Danians. And that is something I would like to see, and that is something I would like to experience. That is media I would like to consume. But it is all off screen. And that's crazy to some extent. But I think it goes to emphasize just how quickly and like secretively, right, how quickly things can change. And we'll see that in the future, and maybe we'll talk about it more then. Now, more lore we get is Maxwor's vehicle. I think it's called the Wing Fin, even though I wish it was the Flit Float, let me tell you. But this vehicle can travel by sky and sea and has an ejectable jet ski, which is pretty cool, I guess. And my last piece of lore is that there are some kind of ruins beneath Kiru City, right? Interest and Raznus find themselves fighting in this buried Colosseum-like structure with statues of warriors with armor and shields and spears. It's very Greco-Roman influenced, but you gotta ask yourself, like, what is the significance of having these ruins underground in Kiru City? Like, what was there before Kiru City? How did they get covered up? Who lived there? What was that culture? And so this is the piece of lore that I'm contributing to the canon, is that there was something in Kiru City before Kiru City, and somehow, this mountainscape or this like very level became very flat, right? Kiru City is very flat. But underneath it, there's some rich lore, there's some history there. Now, onto fun facts and other notes. Raznus. We gotta talk about Raznus. The episode is called Raznus Returns. Now, obviously, Raznus has been genetically altered and his allegiance has changed, and that was all established in his first episode. But this episode shows that he's really gotten some of his personality back. Right before the transformation, Raznus was a pacifist. He sought peace between the Danians and the Overworlders. And in this episode, he argues with Odu Bathax to keep peace, which follows the Queen's orders. So really, he's being a rule follower here, but he wants to try to talk to Interest before resorting to violence. And here's the thing, you can see that he's fallen into the Danian line of thinking of trying to use influence, because he does try to use a parasite on Interest to make him understand his point of view. Very Danian of him, that's Danian culture. But even so, like, the parasite changed him physically, but it didn't necessarily change his personality. He's still pacifist first. He's still peace first and is trying to avoid conflict. And that's who he was before and that's who he is now. Right? Now, how much of those memories or experiences still influence who he is today and how much has been built up from his new Danian experience, who's to say? But there is just a little seed of who he was within him. And I think that's noteworthy. Now, I do also want to say Interest here shows an impressive display of power and action. And, like, of course, she is the fiercest warrior in the overworld, so, like, she kind of ate that up, and we have to give that to her. And I think the last thing I want to point out in this episode is that this is really an episode of duos, right? You have Tom and Kaz, you have Bodil and Ulkiex, you have Maxor and Interest, you have Raznus and Odubathax, right? We have all of these like duos, teams of two, and some of them are functional duos and some of them are not, but they represent different sides of the conflict and different aspects of the chaotic experience, right? You have the human, you have the technological creators, you have the leaders, you have the warriors. Tom and Kaz are experiencing this through the human lens. Odo and Ulkiex are experiencing it through, they are the technological creators, they're the more intellectuals, right? Whereas Maxor Interest and I would say Odubathax are the warriors. Or you could say Interest, Odubathax are the warriors, but Maxor and Raznus are the leaders. Think about that one. It, you know, it's just a way that this is constructed is we have all of these teams of two that can like bounce off of each other. I think it's interesting. Now, my final thoughts on this episode are, is this my favorite episode? No. But this episode like didn't do bad things, right? It never made a joke that seems outdated, or it never gave me secondhand embarrassment. And the action here is really cool, right? Interest shows off quite a bit, and the action is the push and pull of power in the story, and so it is like relevant action. None of it is frivolous action, if you will, but it does hold such an importance to the story, and this is an integral piece of how the Alliance takes shape. And if somebody was like, would you cut this episode? I would say no. This is an important episode. And there's tension and there's stakes and it plays a key role in the story. And overall, like, neutrally enjoyed. You know? Good episode. Had a good time. And that's all that matters. So let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.